right, man. So then with King Diamond, like I'm 34, so my introduction, was not the early albums. I was just being born with a lot of that stuff, and so mine was when Clerks II came out. Did that do a lot for the band? Having them, having the Welcome Home and all that, going on with that movie.
Yeah, Clerks. You know what? I just, it's not very big over here in Europe, so I just saw some clips of that. I haven't seen the movie, to be honest to you, but I guess in the U.S. that helped a lot for sure. For younger people,
Yeah.
I'm sure it did. But to be honest to you, I don't really know too much about that, because I haven't seen the movie, haven't really been following what happened in the U.S. after that either.
Right. Okay, that's funny. Yeah, for a lot of people my age, it's just we didn't know what the hell it was, and we would go look it up, and then all of a sudden, all this material to check out and everything. So it was cool.
People are actually talking about that too. It's like, wow, that's cool, because over here it's like just pass by, without any big notice at all.
Okay, so, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I just want to go back for a second to when you got the call to join King Diamond and everything. What was that like being offered an audition? I'm pretty sure you were pretty young at the time. You were playing in some bands and things like that, but being that Merciful Fate was pretty established, that had to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, of course. I was like 22 years old, when Mickey D called me. We were friends back in Gothenburg prior to that, and we jammed along and we played a little bit together, for a while too. And I kind of followed him, and we talked once in a while, and he said, "Hey man, it's really cool, to work out this stuff with King Diamond, and we're in the studio now, and blah 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 blah." And then a few weeks later, he called me and said that they needed a guitarist because it didn't really work out with the guitarist they had at that time. So I was working in the music store at the time, playing with some local bands, and I said, "Okay, cool. This is this is the chance of my life. So I quit my job, took my Marshall amplifier, my guitar, and took the train down to Copenhagen. And of course, I said to myself, this is now or never, and stepped into the studio, said hi to the guys and listened to some of the songs. And I thought it sounded just phenomenal. That was really cool, because I've been really into kind of a horror thing with Black Sabbath, Alice Cooper, and, the stage kind of theatrical things like Kiss had also, back in the days. And so I was really interested in that, and a combination of really cool music with theatrical thing on stage. That was just a great combination, I thought, So when I heard King Diamond music, I thought it was like, wow, this is really cool. And it's very different from Merciful Fate, which I wasn't a super big fan of. I thought they had some great stuff, of course, but I didn't like everything they did. But I think, when I heard the first songs of King Diamond, I thought it sounded like a big upgrade, like a coming into the 80s instead of stepping in the 70s kind of, which I think Merciful Fate was more like a 70s influenced band.
Yeah.
So I was really, happily surprised when I heard the first couple of songs with King Diamond at that time in the studio. And they asked me to, take up my guitar and play along with the song for some loops, and just come up with some stuff for the song called Dressed in White. And so I played along. They recorded some stuff, and later on that afternoon, they had a meeting, and then King came out and said, "Hey, welcome, you're in the band."
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. I was 22 years old, and that was a big thing for me, of course,
Yeah. What was the energy like with everybody in the band? I know a lot of it was already written and everything. Did it seem like, everybody kind of wanted to prove themselves with this one, being that, it's the first time, it's a new name, it's not Merciful Fate anymore, and people were probably looking to see if, it was going to be able to maintain the quality?
Yeah, I think the energy was great, because everything was like different to their, from their earlier stuff, so everyone's like really, really onto, getting this right and playing the right things, and the right sound and all that, and of course me, just jumping in the studio when the drums were done, Most of the bass were done, rhythm guitars were done. So we had the vocals and some keyboard stuff and solos to still be recorded, So yeah, I thought it was just great to come in that phase of the recording, when the basic stuff were done, so you can actually hear, how the songs were going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought it was a great experience, and I still remember that day when I went down to Copenhagen, of course,
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm pretty interested in like the period between Fatal Portrait and then Abigail, since now you're probably a little more comfortable. You've been in the band. You guys have been touring, I'm sure. So how was it different going into Abigail and being finally able to start, writing songs before, you're getting to the lead part?
Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting period because, I moved down to Copenhagen that summer of '85. And we, after album was done, we started to rehearse a lot. And because we had like this Christmas show coming up in December, that was the first show ever for King Diamond at a place called Saga in Copenhagen, which was like a really cool place. And we knew that a lot of people would come there to check out this new project, with or band with King Diamond. And so we practiced and rehearsed a lot in front of that in December. And also after that show, we took a little break and we did a European tour. And 1986, then we did a US tour. And we got together real well, played everything together real good, and I know that as soon as we got back from that US tour in like September, October, something like that, King started to write music right away, and so did I, and Michael Denner too. And we started to rehearse really, really heavy, like in, September, October, or something like that, up until the recording started in December 1986. And that was like, of course, totally different because I got to know the guys real well then, and we've been on tour together. And we just had a lot of fun, and we knew, each other in the way of, how everyone was playing and all that, So that was, of course, very, very different, when we went into the studio. And we just had a great feel when we entered the studio in December 1986 to record Abigail, and that still, I think, kind of is captured, on the album. It's just a very, very cool album, that kind of, the spirit of that, shines through, in the recording and in the songs and everything, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love that album so much too. 'Cause there's so much going on. It seems like, with the intricacies of the harmonies, solos, the keyboards, it's just, there's so much packed in there that makes it, you go back to it and you're always kind of hearing different things. And do you remember spending a lot of time like going back and be like, we need to add, the keys here, or we need to do some harmonizing here? Was there a lot of that, or was it just kind of flying through and getting it out there?
No, I mean, it wasn't that much planning on that, like we had some great ideas, but we were kind of efficient at that time. And you said, hey, maybe you should do a harmony here and the thing there, so we were working fast. It's not like we spent like weeks and weeks, additionally weeks, to record stuff. I mean, I think we had like about 4 weeks of recording and maybe 2 weeks of mix and editing and mastering and all that, so everything went according to the plan, I believe, we were just efficient, and but of course, we did some additional things, but it's not that, we spent a lot of time doing it. We had it pretty clear, what could be done, and we tried out a few things and harmonies here and there, and if it sounded good, we just kept it,
Yeah, right. Didn't overthink it. Okay. Well, I think one of the tracks, just from trying to look things up a little bit, that you had written was the 7th Day of July. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
How did that go for you? Just to look at like one song, is that something that you had sat down, wrote all on your own? How did you try and get the vibe for that one? Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, well, not that specific song, but I remember Mansion in Darkness.
Okay.
That I wrote like the summer of 87. And that was like kind of weird because I remember all my friends, that was before, I believe, the US tour started, so we had a little break there, and I was just home playing guitar. And this riff came up and it's like, wow, I got to do something about this, And I remember my friends, they went out, partying and stuff, because that was a big midsummer weekend in Sweden, that everyone celebrates. And I just decided to stay home and, finish this song. I had everything pretty clear. And then when we started to rehearse after that US tour, I just, had everything clear and showed it to the other guys, and we started to rehearse it.
That's cool. Was that?
And I think I just documented everything, on a cassette tape at that time. That's how we did it.
Yeah, right. And cool. That's cool. All right. So then when you guys get over, I'm not going to go through all the albums, but I had just a few questions about some of those early ones.
Yeah.
When you got to Them, that one, I think that was the first one I had heard, like I said, from the movie and everything. And man, it really felt like such a cohesive, you take the Abigail thing with the storyline and the eerie atmosphere, and everything kind of amped up a little bit with all of that. King's going even more crazy with his vocals, and it just, man, I love that album still so much. And how much of that album had to do, like, you had some member changes going on, you're now been in the band for a while longer now, and I'm sure you're kind of carrying a little more share with Michael not being in the band. And how much of all that had to do with it, or was it just that you guys that were just being that it's been a little while as a band?
I think, King's riff, he showed it pretty early to me, and that was, very progressive and very aggressive, and sometimes very speedy and stuff, So I guess that affected, the whole songwriting phase, That's kind of, what I came up with too. And it's, of course, different to the Abigail, because we wanted to evolve in that more progressive style. And I think that's actually one of the most progressive albums we have. It's Them, for sure, A lot of crazy stuff going on that album. And that also goes for Mickey, He was doing some crazy stuff on the album. And of course, some of it had to do with the change of lineup too, I believe, We wanted to do something new and fresh, But they came in like after the songs were written. So it's more the playing on the album, then that's a little bit different, of course, to the album before that than the music itself. The music itself were written before they came in, so they didn't really affect that much. It was just a play on the recording.
I get it. So when you're doing your solos for these albums, I mean, they're just. Yeah, they're so great, and they capture so many different things based on the song. Is there any kind of a vibe or a headspace you like to get in when you're writing or recording them?
Yeah, I remember the first couple of albums, I sat in the studio in like an ISO booth far away, at the very back of the studio. And I just had a lit candle, to get the right vibe. Lit candle next to my Marshall cabinet and my amp, and I sat in there recording some of the solos, And that's how I liked it back then, Now I just try to turn everything outside off and just focus in the recording of the solos in a different way, But that was pretty cool to do that, because that studio was kind of a, stone walls, and that was a little eerie in itself, to do that.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's how I did it back then, Maybe I should try that again sometime,
Hey, I mean, yeah, it seems like a way to get a good vibe going. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, lit up a chandelier, turn out the lights and just record it,
Right. It's so in that studio you were talking about, that was when you guys were back working with Roberto.
Yeah.
Falco, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. How did he influence the sound at all? Since he was on the first, 4 or 5 albums, was he a big part of that sound, or?
I think he was, because, at that time, we didn't know too much about sounds and stuff, We just, tried to find something that sounded good, But he was a good director, and producer of that, definitely. And he was also a big part of some of the keyboard parts on the first couple of albums, because he was a great keyboard player,
Yeah.
So King, told him, maybe you should try this, and maybe you could play this and this and that, So okay, let's try it, So he came up with some really cool stuff for the first couple of albums.
That's cool. Sure. That's cool, yeah, because the keys was another one of those things that hooked me, being as, I've always been a big horror fan, especially that early stuff, and hearing those synth parts and those keys, it kind of took me right to that. Was that kind of the idea with some of that?
Yeah, I mean, King had, some great ideas, but he wasn't able to play it as good as Roberto, so
Mm,
they kind of worked stuff out together.
yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense. That makes
yeah.
sense. I didn't know, like, at first, since you don't see King up there playing a guitar on stage, that he could play guitar. What's it like working with him? Do you guys ever write a song together, or is it usually, one person writes one, another one writes another one?
It's exactly like that. I write my stuff and he writes his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's some parts actually on, what's it called? Oh, God, the last one we released as a single, God, Madness, Masquerade.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. And where he came up with like a verse riff that he thought, this is much better to sing to. So can we please exchange that to what you have, and sure, let's try it, and that worked out better for his vocals. So that's one of the few times actually that we work together on one thing like that. Usually it's like he's writing his stuff and I'm writing my stuff, and then we get together and talk about it and just move parts or exchange parts. But I don't really, say too much about his songs, and he doesn't really say
Yeah.
much about my songs in that sense.
Well, that kind of is nice too, because then you're probably avoiding getting in fights about
Yeah,
the songs and trying to get whose part here or there and all that. So that probably works good.
yeah. Well, fine so far.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. After all these years, I guess so.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever have to spend much time changing, like, the structure of things? You guys do these big concept albums. You got the storyline. You're trying to make things kind of flow with that and match that. Is there a lot of time spent on figuring out, or maybe you have to add a part for some theatrical part that King is going to do, or to fit a storyline? Is there a lot of thought on that, or a lot of work that has to be done for that aspect?
Yeah, there is a lot of work on that. When we have the songs, and the King is writing the story, he kind of puts in the songs in the right, sequence of the album, to get the right mood, So that's a lot of work right there to do that, try to fit everything in,
Yeah.
Okay, the third song, maybe we should move that to like the seventh song, because this is what happens, later on in the story, things like that, and it's of course really hard to capture, the feels of everything, in the right way, but we managed, and he managed for sure, to do that. So I'm sure the next one will be really good too.
Right. What if you had to say, like, what would be the biggest difference between yours and his songwriting? Is there any, like, big things that jump out?
That's really hard to say, man. I don't know. I think other people would be better to judge that,
I get it.
Yeah.
So nowadays, now we're it's been a little while. We've been waiting for a new album. I know we've had so many things going on with the pandemic and everything else. You guys had that killer song that you were just talking about that you guys put out a little while ago. Have you guys working on it right now, or what's the plan for it?
Yeah, I mean, in January, I sent King a bunch of songs that I composed. And that was actually done like mid-January. And then we started working on that this spring. But then, this thing came in between, kind of thing, with the Merciful Fate European Festival Tour. And they're going to do some dates in the fall too, So as soon as he's done with that, we're going to continue work on that, But we have a lot of songs. And also King has a lot of ideas, for songs. So as soon as he's done with Merciful Fate stuff, we're going to start working hardcore on this stuff.
Okay, that's cool. And I'm sure once that comes out, then we can look for some touring and all that sort of thing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Last question then. Out of the whole discography, everybody knows the first few albums, but there's so many killer albums that go past those. I spent time talking about those. I could go through every one if we had time, but I'm not going to do that to you. But what do you think would be one that people should check out if they've only listened to the first, whatever, 3 or 4, whatever it may be? What would be one from the later years that you think is that people need to go and listen to right now?
Oh, man. I think House of God, well, it might not be one of the later ones, but House of God is really good. And Give Me Your Soul, Please. I think it's really good, great songs and all that too.
Yeah.
So I think they should check out that too, I mean, when people ask me what song, what album should I listen to, one of my favorite always is like Abigail,
Sure.
and maybe even Fatal Portrait actually, because that's the start of everything. So I can always put that on, and say, wow, this is a cool album.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I recently went. I've been going back to the discography the past couple of years more and more and more, and the Eye is one that jumped out to me. And I don't hear it get talked about nearly as much as those first few. But man, it just seems like such a special album too, where you guys really got the atmosphere right for it, with everything coming together, and the song. There's some really strong songs on there, and for some reason, I don't hear about it mentioned as much. I don't know if it was this the time period of what it came out or what the reason was there, but
it might have been. I'm not sure about that either. But we didn't really tour any of on that album, because that's when after the recording of that, we didn't have a record label. So everything stood still for a couple of years right there. That might be the reason too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
But if I can tell you something about the songs I've written so far, it's like a step back into the first couple of albums for sure. When it comes to the atmospheres and the riffs and all that. So it's like back to the roots kind of thing. And we've been talking about too. Me and King about maybe you should look back just a little bit. To not lose track of what we're actually want to do, and where our roots come from, and all that, So yeah, I think I really think that the audience, they will like what they hear.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes sense. I mean, that track you guys already put out is so great. It's killer. So yeah, that's awesome. Really looking forward to it, man.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, listen, I don't want to take any more of your time. You're busy. You got the studio. Oh, before I meant to add, so people know though, you have the studio. You are working with bands. How often are you doing that? Is there some big names you've done more recently? I remember the At the Gates album from maybe it was even last year, I think. Is that correct?
That was released last year. Yeah. I was working here with them for a couple of weeks. Exactly. They were tracking all the guitars and the bass here. They were doing drums over in London, I believe. No, they were doing drums in Stockholm in the studio, and then they were mixing it somewhere else. So yeah, I've been working. I mean, this is what I do when I'm not on tour. I'm working like all the time, it seems like.
Yeah.
So when we're not working with King Diamond or our stuff, this is what I do, producing other bands and recording it, And I love this just as much as being out with King Diamond and touring, because it's still work with music in a different way, And I love to work with people and create good things, So I'm in the middle of mixing a band from Brazil right now, actually. And in a couple of weeks, there is a band called Shining coming in.
Okay.
They're going to record their 11th album, and they have Nick Barker, from Cradle of Filth, drummer, and he's been with Dimmy Borgir also. I think they have him as drummer this time around, so that's going to be really exciting to have him in the studio.
Right.
And what else have I done? Back in the days, I've had Hammerfall in the studio. I had In Flames been here for just recording like a song or so, and I had, a lot of different musicians here, from actually all over the world,
Yeah. When did you first get into that? I mean, was there a certain period where you said, I need to start actually doing this myself?
That was, I think, early 90s, I believe, when I started to think, I got to find a good way to document my songs to start with, so I can present it in a good way to the other members of the band. That's actually how it started.
Okay, right. That makes sense.
And then people who heard that, they said, hey, this sounds really good. Maybe you can, help me record stuff. And then I invested in some better gear, and that's that's how it started.
Yeah.
Got my first tape machine and a really cool mixing console, and doing better and better jobs, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, bands from all over the world, they actually come here to the studio here in Sweden to record and mix and even mastering. So yeah, That's what I do, and I love it still.
That's great. Yeah, what a perfect way in between writing, touring for King Diamond to have something to do, to make some money, and to still be involved with music. I mean, that seems like the dream right there. Having both projects like that, that's great.
It is, man.
That's great.
Definitely, yeah.
All right, Andy. Well, again, I appreciate it so much, and good luck with the rest of that album and whatever you're working on right now, man. We'll be waiting for it.
Hey, thank you, man, and you keep in touch. If you have any questions, just get back.